So that brings us to, okay, well, the guys aren't open. The concepts aren't working as well. There is traditionally, historically, perhaps, it's not a tradition, it's history. Not like Kliff is like, oh, yay, let's practice our tradition of regression in the second half of the season. Historically speaking, Kliff Kingsbury's offenses have had trouble later on in seasons. That is in Arizona, that is in college, that is everywhere pretty much that he has been. So are either defenses catching up, or is there some kind of regression in Kliff Kingsbury the last couple of weeks that should give us pause, nervousness, whatever, for the second half of the season after he was arguably the best coordinator in football over the first half of it?
Yeah, I don't think so. I mean, I think when you look at Pittsburgh, I mean, how many, we talked about it in the post game, but like how many drop balls were there? How many missed throws were there? And again, like that, a little bit of that is done by Pittsburgh, pressure burst pipes. Like you just add a little bit of pressure to the offense and guys don't make the plays that they normally make. In this game, I feel like when you go back and watch, there are opportunities if you can kind of work the progression. There's a play that I remember where it's like front side corner, little sit route, and then there's a crosser, and then there's a dig on the backside. And so Jaden does a good job of saying no to this. He gets to the crosser, but they're kind of in some type of match, so the crosser's dead, and he should just rip the dig. Just boom, rip the dig right now. But he doesn't have time to get there. So like in terms of like open concept, like that's open. That's NFL open, and that's a big play. But Jalen Carter's beaten, the guard, and it ends up being a pressure, and he can't get out and scramble and kind of buy time. And so I think that again, like I wish I could. The one thing I want fans and people who listen to this podcast to take away from this is just how good Philly's defense was. And I think the other thing that's important to remember about this is a short week of prep. And I think when you look at both defenses, Philly's defense and the Commanders' defense on a short week of prep, who looked better? It's the defenses, right? Because offenses don't have enough time to kind of really delve into, hey, this is our third down, this is our red zone, this is how they play this traditionally, right? There's not enough time. Like being in a short week, having played in a couple of those games over the course of my career, you feel like you're sprinting intellectually to keep up. And so sometimes stuff gets missed. It's not quite as detailed as it was. And I think, again, you watch Philly's offense, it shows up. Like we talked about how Jalen Hurts is missing like open throws. He's missing guys. He's scrambling when he shouldn't. He's unsettled, right? Same thing with Jade. And when you watch Thursday night football traditionally, it's usually not a very good game, right? Guys are banged up. Intellectually, offenses don't look very good. It's part of the process, I think,
the week
too.
Before the Ravens-Bengals game, it's one of the greatest football games we've ever seen. Big time exception. Big time, not
right.
the rule.
Right. And so I think like that's the thing that's a great point, is traditionally the joke on Thursday night is it's terrible football. And when you get a good one, it's the outlier, not the rule, right? So that's 100% right. And so I think like there was an element of that too, is just Jaden is such a master of kind of the intellectual process, right? And he just didn't have the reps this week. And so to say that the offense is regressing, I look at the Bears game, they played well. Look at the Giants game, they played well. Look at the Steelers game. I think the offensive scheme played well. And then here we are on a Thursday night game with against a very, very talented and a very well-executed Philly defense on a short week of prep. And you can tell the execution there wasn't all the way there for us offensively. And you're going to see a little bit of regression. And the other thing I want to point out too is, while we're on this point, is the rushing efficiency in this game is way down, which again, when the rushing efficiency for Kliff's offense hasn't been there, the offense hasn't been as effective. So I think it's obviously multifactorial. I don't see regression for the offense. I see a lack of execution versus a good defense on a short week. And I think that's probably more the explanation.
Yeah, let me try to frame this another way too, to see if we can flesh this out even more. To me, some kind of offensive regression would be the opportunities are no longer there. Like defenses are just stuck on everything they're doing. And we've seen minimal amounts of that in ways that we've talked about, right? Like the screen game is really struggling as of late. And some of that is, okay, they call it in the fringe red and they can't, like defenses are alert to it. And okay, yeah, if you have some tendencies, that happens to every coordinator on varying levels in the second half of seasons. And I think in the past, Kliff has really struggled to make those adjustments. But in this game, I don't think that was necessarily the issue. And now you've got this mini bye, and hopefully they come out and they can hit some other stuff. And you had some of these trick plays, or, we call them trick, gadget, game plan, whatever level of specificity you want to use. Some of those were big plays for them earlier in the year, and some of those just haven't hit. But to me, that has more to do with the third thing that we're about to talk about than it does with Kliff. Like, to me, the opportunities are still there. The execution is not quite as sharp. If they're doing something that the details are getting lost in the teaching, okay, well, that can go on the coaching staff to some level. But I also just think realistically that when the scheme is still presenting opportunities and the players aren't executing it, and it's stuff that they have executed, that's a tough spot for a coordinator, and says more about, again, it's not for lack of effort. So when I say it's more about the players, it's not about their effort and their trying. It's just their ability to do it, because playing NFL football is really hard and the other teams are really good. And especially the last 2 weeks, you have 2 of the 5 best defenses in football that you're trying to execute against.
Yeah, I think that's 100% right. And I think when you look around the league, and this is, I think it's always good to give it some context. Like, look at San Francisco. Like, they've had a little bit of an offensive regression. Green Bay, a little bit of an offensive regression. And it just, defensive coordinators are smart. They have a season's worth of film to look at, and they understand more acutely the tendencies of the offense. And it's just time. And so I think that's another thing, is I think this little kind of 10-day mini buy period is going to be great, because it's going to say, okay, what can we do a little bit differently? How can we get to some of this stuff we like with some different window dressing? And hopefully it kind of gives you a little bit of like a trampoline jump for the next 2 games, and you get your actual buy, and you kind of push for the home stretch. So I think you articulated that really well. It's the opportunities seem to be there. And I think that's the other thing too, is it's not necessarily the players' fault. I think you got to give credit to Philly in this case, right? They are very talented. They're very good. They're very fast. The windows are small. The timing has to be perfect. And that's the thing that I come away with, is like, versus Pittsburgh, I felt like we were in the fight a little bit, a little bit more, right? They played a lot of man. We were able to win a one-on-one matchups. We had a good protection plan. Philly just was a different kind of beast in terms of, we haven't seen a coverage group like this. And you marry that with a very good pass rush, and it's going to be really challenging. And so I think the game that I'm most excited for, quite honestly, for the rest of the season is the second Philly game. Because I'm like, what can we do with a full week? What can we do when we're a little bit healthier? Because I think that was the other thing. People forget this too. I remember talking to Bram and London and Kime and you leading into that game, and the team was banged up, man. Offensive line, every single one of those guys has some type of like significant injury that they're playing with, right? Obviously, Jaden's ribs, like, how impactful is that? But B-Rob's coming off the hand. Like, everybody needs a break. And you want to play Philly when you're at your best. And I felt like this team wasn't at their best.
Yeah, and Philly had some breaks, buys, long weeks, etc. So they were fresh, and also they played, like, again, Philly's playing incredible. This is not a shot at the Eagles. Like, they're clearly, I think, the second best team in the NFC right now behind Detroit. But like, they've had some pretty good cupcakes on their schedule. So like, I was talking to someone and they were like, "Yeah, Philly had 4 bye weeks in a row," and I won't say that. That's a bit extreme. They were still playing NFL football teams, but like, one of them was the Cowboys in the first week without Dak Prescott, and boy, do they not look like a good football team. Good news, off a short week for Dallas and a mini bye for Washington. That's who's coming to town on Sunday. The last narrative that we're going to play, true false. So I think for us to play the game more acutely here, Jaden is playing like he's hurt. False. Kliff is regressing in some way, or / defenses are catching up. Like 90% false. Yeah. And that 10% is the thing that happens to every coordinator. I think that this one is probably true, Logan, that we went into the season being like, hey, this team is understaffed. And then they came out and they have maximized their talent in an incredible way for most of this season. But I do think that the inevitable regression to the mean in the last couple of weeks has shown up. And some of that is enhanced by injury. Like, Nick Allegretti's not an all-pro guard. I love Nick Allegretti. He's a wonderful person. He's genuinely hilarious. He's also a big sports talk radio fan, which clearly is very important. But Nick is banged up, and he's not an all-pro to start with. And so that's going to be really tough. Brandon Coleman at left tackle, like, he's had some rookie moments the last couple of weeks in a major way. He's still learning, and that's okay. I still think he's probably...
His shoulder's messed up, too.
Yeah, 100%. So he's got the shoulder issue. He's a rookie. Allegretti, Biotish is banged up. Cosme is banged up. Wiley's obviously banged up. Just finally getting back on the field, it was a step in the right direction for him. So you've got that. Noah Brown, I think he's been great for being a guy that got here the week before the season, but like he was also cut in training camp. And so there's probably a ceiling there. Luke is still a rookie, and like on down the list, Diami's had a really good season for the role that he's been asked to do. And then the last couple of weeks, it's like, oh, right, you're still Diami Brown. And again, I love Diami, the dude, but that is just a reality of where they're at from a talent standpoint. I think that with the drops, some of the missed blocks, some of the issues that they've had where you've just had guys get beat, I think this is the actual truest statement. And honestly, compared to the other two, I think that's probably a good thing. One, it means good things in the long term. And two, with this mini bye and then the bye to come, if they can get healthy and get back and, start re-maximizing their talent, I think they can still, finish this season strong and make the playoffs. And then we'll see what happens when they get there. But I think this is the one that is true when it comes to the offense.
No, this does. I mean, I think it's true kind of for the whole team. And this is not an indictment of the roster. I think when you go back and look at the expectations at the beginning of the year, I think, Vegas had him winning 5 games or something, 6 games, something like that. I think it was 5.5. And there's a reason for that. It's, you're starting a rookie quarterback with a roster that's understaffed. And I think when you look at where they're at, I mean, it's exceeded expectations tremendously. Like, look at the coaching that Kliff's done. Look how he's insulated the offensive line. All of those things. And so I think you come in and you're like, wow, like these guys are really, really good. They're doing a great job. Terry's looking better than he's ever looked. Zach's looks like he's got, more in the tank. And then you play a playoff caliber team in Philadelphia and you see the difference in roster composition, right? Look at their offense. Look at their offensive line just as a starting point, right? They've got, I think it's, how many? 1, 2, 3. Like, I got a bunch of first-round picks on there. They're all draft picks, all those guys, except for Mailata, who's a 7th-round pick. But again, that's a little bit of an anomaly there.
He's turned into an all-pro, so it's worked out all right.
Yeah, Dallas Goedert's a 2nd-round pick. I think late 2nd round, or late first, early 2nd round. A.J. Brown, Devontae Smith, Saquon Barkley, like all first-round picks. Jalen Hurts, 2nd-round pick. And you see the level of athletic ability in that group, right? And then you look at the defense, and it's the same type of thing. Look at their defensive line. Look at their linebackers. Look at their secondary. It's just a different caliber of athlete. And I make this comparison all the time because it's something that I do a lot. In high school, the talent discrepancies can be really crazy, right? They can be, like you can play a team that's like 6A and they're a big school and they've got a lot of really good players. And you can be in a game with a really talented football team for a long time. But at some point, the attrition, the mental attrition, the physical attrition over the course of that game usually wears out and the more talented team wins the football game. And I kind of felt like this is what it was. And I think if and this is not an indictment of the players on the roster. This is just a fact of NFL football. That I'm guilty of this probably more than anybody as a player, right? Is when Logan Paulson's on your roster and I'm playing a lot of minutes, the organization, the GM, the front office, they're like, man, we need to upgrade at tight end. And that's part of the deal, right? They want somebody like Kyle Pitts or, Brock Bowers who can go out there and make plays and elevate the offense in a way that I physically can't do it. That doesn't mean I'm a bad football player. It doesn't mean any of these guys on the team are bad football players. It just means that there is areas for improvement. And I think when earlier in the season, it doesn't show up because you're playing kind of the middle of the NFL roster, in some cases the bottom of the NFL roster. But when you see the peaks, right? When you see the Pittsburghs, when you see the Philadelphia Eagles, it's like, oh shoot, like there are some areas to improve. And I think, again, that's not an indictment of this team. I think back to 2017 when I was with San Francisco, and that team was a very good team, very solid team. But they upgraded. They got George Kittle. They got Brandon Ayuk. They got Deebo Samuel. They found different offensive linemen to plug in there. They brought in Christian McCaffrey. And think about the talent influx over the last, 7 years since I left?
Yeah.
Like it's different. And that's what takes you from a good team to a playoff team. Another great example is Detroit. Like look at all of the pieces that they've added, right? And they've built around there. Their offensive line, the receivers. It's been a talent influx. And that initial team when Dan Campbell got there was not a bad team, but now they're a playoff caliber team. And there is a difference from a talent perspective. And I think that's kind of what you're seeing here. And again, we're not criticizing any of the players because I am, again, so impressed with how they've all played this year. But to go from good to competing with a top 5, top 10 team in the NFL it takes a little bit more juice, I guess.
Yeah, and I think you just look at what you just said, right? And how are you describing these guys? First round pick, second round pick, like high draft picks.
Yeah.
And not to beat up on the old administration, just to restate the obvious fact, all them dudes that they took in the first couple rounds, with the exception of basically Sam Cosmi, are not currently with the team or playing any minutes. Like something we should probably talk about on some level, or we will talk about with the defense, is like Michael Davis is out there playing over Emmanuel Forbes the other day. Like that's a problem. And again, like we've talked about some of the BSJ stuff, like BSJ's in some of these positions because Emmanuel Forbes does not work out.
That's a great point.
And that is the reality of the hole that Adam Peters is trying to dig this roster out of. And on a big picture, like we can be adult enough to say it. Like, yeah, they've got a bunch of guys that are probably on championship teams backups being starters. They are playing really hard. They're doing an excellent job. They are getting the most out of this. They are getting the most out of themselves. So the coaches, are getting the most out of them. The players, are getting the most out of themselves. And that is admirable. And it makes them really fun to root for because they're always going to be a bit of a scrappy underdog until Peters gets the rest of the players that he wants over the long term in. But that is going to be a multiple draft and free agency signings process. And it's for them, it's like why you go get a Marshawn Lattimore, right? Lattimore instantly becomes one of the best, most talented players on the roster the second he takes the field, because they just don't have those blue chip kind of guys. And that's something that we've talked about in the offseason. And so, Duran's still there, but he's not exactly playing at a blue chip level right now. There's a couple other guys that, Terry's playing at a pretty blue chip level right now, but he's a third rounder that's worked out far beyond anything anyone would ever imagine. But he's not Justin Jefferson. He's not AJ Brown. And so one of the things that then happens is every success you have basically has to be schemed up, because it's not going to be Saquon Barkley slipping a tackle on a simple check down and getting a 60-yard touchdown. That's just not in the cards for this football team. And so you have to have your scheme work at an extraordinarily high level. And if you get one of these teams where they can just have a player make a play and blow up your scheme, you're kind of up a creek without a paddle. And I think that's happened to an extent the last couple of weeks, where there's just not the guys around to elevate. And Terry's done some of it. Jaden obviously is capable of elevating against a lot of teams, but it's a lot harder when, still like within the context of scheme, Nick Allegretti or Tyler Biotish or any of these linemen have to block someone one-on-one because like that's football, and the other guy wins. Well, now your scheme's kind of irrelevant. And so when you get in some of these man-to-man situations, not just receivers on corners, but some of these player-on-player situations, and the other player wins, and that's kind of what's to be expected because of the talent levels, like there's only so much you can do about that.
Yeah. And so I think if you're a fan, you're like, well, what do we take from this? I think you say they've done a good job, the current, Adam Peters, Dan Quinn, of coaching these guys up, building a culture, and getting guys to punch above their weight. And those are the best teams to play for. Like when I was here in 2012, like that team was a classic punch above your weight class team, right? You're elevated by scheme. Obviously, Robert and like the zone read and all that kind of stuff was great. The defense kind of punched above their weight class a little bit. And you can win football games with that. It's harder when you're playing the top shelf teams in the NFL. And I think that's what we're getting at here is like this team, and like you alluded to, the previous administration didn't do a great job of identifying the kind of the right people to be here long term. And, the draft's hard and all that kind of stuff. But obviously other teams and other organizations, like the good ones right now, I mean, look at Philly, look at Detroit, look at San Francisco, name your top shelf team. They've done a great job in the draft of finding and identifying talent. And that's something that we just haven't done here with the Washington Commanders. So, but again, like this team's good. I think they're a good team. It's just when you're playing, again, the big dogs, you got to be locked in 100% because your margin for error is just so small.
100%. And the last thing I'll just add real quick is, well, does that mean that they just can't beat big teams? Because that's one of the other narratives, right? It's like, oh, they can't beat a good team.
You're right.
And it's like, no, they probably won't. Like if we're being totally honest, like they're the underdog. That's what being an underdog is.
Like
they play
if you run
win.
the sim, right? If you run the sim, right, it's like 60-40, right? It's like you do your like 60% of the time they're going to win because they're a more talented team. But look at the freaking Pittsburgh game, man. Pittsburgh went toe-to-toe with what I believe is one of the best teams in football and beat them. They beat Baltimore. They made Lamar Jackson look a little bit out of sorts, that whole team. They found turnovers. And we, the Commanders, are like probably 2 big throws and a draw away from winning that game on a last second possession. And that speaks to defensively where we're at, offensively what Kliff's doing. Like this is a good football team. They can be good. I'm very confident, and this is going to sound crazy, that on a full week of prep, we go toe-to-toe with Philly because our offense is going to be playing better. Like, I'm very confident. But again, the talent is the thing that I'm going to go back to the high school football thing. It's you spend all week scheming stuff up, trying to find those opportunities. But it's nice when you got a dude who's just better, and you're like, let's just give him the ball,
right?
And they're going to win. And it makes it easier on the coaches. It makes it easier on the team. And like when you look at Philly, they got a bunch of. Look at Detroit. Like when you watch Detroit, every one of their guys feels like that dude who can just take it and be a guy and elevate the offense. And so I think that's more what we're talking about. It's like, is this team good? Yeah. Are they well coached? Absolutely. Are they playing their absolute faces off? Yeah. There's just a couple things that would tip the scale that it just makes it harder for them to win some of those big games, I guess.
When the underdog wins, it doesn't mean they weren't the underdog. And that is kind of the Commanders thing, which, based off of their schedule the rest of the season, by the way, they're going to be favorites in more games than they play than they're not. They got Dallas twice, who's a disaster. New Orleans is better with the new coach, but like they're still the Saints. They have Tennessee in a couple weeks. Like Washington still very easily could win 10 games this season and make the playoffs. They might even win 11, which would be the first time they've done that in forever. Right. But if they do that and then get in the playoffs, they're probably going to be an underdog, and that's okay. That's okay. And but who knows? Maybe they'll be the top wild card team and get the NFC South team, and
it's the first year of what are we going to call that? A restructure, whatever the word they're using.
We're going to call it a rebuild. I don't care what Dan and Adam
call it. It's the first year of that. Like think about where we're at. Just think about your expectations, man. I know. It's all of a sudden we're playoff bound. Oh my God, this is so exciting. I didn't think they were going to win 6 games this year. I really did not. I was like, it's going to be so hard for them to be good. And the only thing I cared about was, did Jaden Daniels show promise? And so now Jaden Daniels has shown so much promise. We're playing so well on defense. Our offense is like rolling. B-Rob's looking great. And now it's like, wow, we should be happy. But instead we're like, are we going to make the playoffs? And we're all stressed out about it. So it's an interesting dynamic for sure.
But if they do get Philly or Detroit or whatever in the playoffs, do I think they can go toe-to-toe with them? I mean, saying that against Detroit right now feels insane for anybody because of what they're doing. But
Philly, yes.
Philly, I feel like they can go toe-to-toe. They probably just based off the probabilities, that's what probably means, would lose. But I feel like they can compete, and that's pretty damn cool.